In the heart of Beijing, amid the constant hustle and bustle, there was one urban legend that sent shivers down the spines of even the most skeptical residents: the story of bus number 375. The route, which ran from the city's outskirts to the downtown area, was infamous not just for its late-night schedule, but for the chilling events associated with it. It was a cold winter night in 1995, and the last bus number 375 was set to leave the Summer Palace station at midnight. The conductor, an older woman named Mrs. Zhang, and the driver, Mr. Liu, were finishing their cigarette breaks, bracing themselves for the long ride through the dimly lit streets. At the first stop, only a few passengers boarded. Among them were an elderly woman clutching her shopping bag, a young couple who whispered softly to each other, and a solitary man in a heavy coat, his face obscured by a scarf. As the bus rumbled through the night, stopping periodically to pick up the occasional passenger, everything seemed normal, until they reached the unlit, desolate area near the fragrant hills. There, standing in the shadows at the bus stop, were three figures: two men in traditional Chinese robes, and a third man who appeared unconscious, supported between them. The driver hesitated, feeling a prick of unease, but he opened the doors nonetheless. The two men boarded, dragging their unconscious companion between them. Their faces were deathly pale, and their eyes, devoid of any warmth, seemed to pierce through the darkness. The passengers watched in silence as the trio took seats at the back of the bus. As the bus continued its journey, an unnatural chill filled the air. Mrs. Zhang noticed it first. The temperature inside the bus seemed to drop suddenly, and a thick, eerie fog began to seep through the windows. She glanced back at the passengers, who were now huddled in their seats, their breath visible in the cold. The elderly woman, sitting near the front, clutched her bag tighter and began to murmur prayers under her breath. The young couple stopped whispering, their eyes wide with fear. The solitary man in the heavy coat seemed to shrink into his seat, his gaze fixed on the floor. Mrs. Zhang's unease grew. She approached the driver and whispered, "Something's not right. Those men at the back, there's something wrong with them." Mr. Liu nodded, his face tense. "I know, but what can we do? We have to finish the route." As they neared the next stop, the elderly woman suddenly stood up, her voice trembling. "I need to get off here," she said urgently, though it was a deserted area with no visible landmarks. The bus pulled to a halt, and as the doors opened, the woman turned to the young couple. "You should come with me," she urged, her eyes wide with desperation. "Please trust me." Hesitantly, the couple followed her off the bus, casting nervous glances at the trio in the back. The solitary man in the heavy coat remained in his seat, too paralyzed with fear to move. As soon as the bus doors closed and it pulled away, the elderly woman let out a sigh of relief. "You're lucky you got off," she told the couple. "Those men, they weren't human. I saw their feet floating inches above the ground. They're spirits." The young couple stared at her in shock and disbelief, but deep down, they felt a cold dread settle over them. Back on the bus, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. Mrs. Zhang's fear reached a breaking point when she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that the third man, the one who had appeared unconscious, was now sitting upright, his eyes wide open and glowing with a malevolent light. Before she could alert Mr. Liu, the bus suddenly jerked to a stop. The engine died, and the lights flickered out, plunging the interior into darkness. The passengers screamed as an unearthly wail echoed through the bus, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Mr. Liu frantically tried to restart the engine, but it was no use. The bus was dead, and the spectral figures at the back began to move forward, their eyes fixed on the living passengers with a hunger that chilled the soul. Mrs. Zhang, driven by sheer terror, fumbled for the emergency door release and managed to wrench it open. She and Mr. Liu bolted from the bus, running blindly into the night. The remaining passengers weren't so lucky. Their screams cut off abruptly, swallowed by the night. The next morning, bus number 375 was found abandoned on the side of the road. Inside, there was no sign of the passengers or the ghostly trio. The only clues were the deep, icy chill that still lingered in the air and the faint, ghostly wail that seemed to echo in the distance. The legend of bus number 375 grew, a chilling reminder of the unseen horrors that can lurk in the shadows. The route was eventually shut down, and the bus itself was taken out of service, left to rust and decay. But the story lived on, a terrifying tale whispered by those who remembered the night the spirits rode the streets of Beijing. It was a stormy Friday night, and the wind howled through the old creaky house where Emily, Sophie, and Mia gathered for their weekly sleepover. The trio of middle school friends loved to tell ghost stories and spook each other out, but this night would be different. This night, they decided to summon Bloody Mary. The legend was well known. Chant her name 3 times in front of a mirror in the dark, and she would appear. Some said she was a vengeful spirit with a blood-streaked face. Others claimed she was the restless soul of a witch. Whatever the truth, the thought of invoking her terrified and thrilled the girls in equal measure. "Come on, let's do it," Emily urged, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. Sophie and Mia exchanged nervous glances but nodded. They were all scared, but none wanted to back down. They turned off the lights in the bathroom, leaving only a single candle flickering on the edge of the sink. The small room was cast into deep shadows, and the girls' faces looked pale and ghostly in the dim light. The large mirror above the sink seemed to loom over them, an ominous presence in the darkness. Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward, her reflection trembling in the mirror. "Are we ready?" Sophie and Mia nodded, their eyes wide with fear. "Okay," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Together they chanted, "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary." The room fell silent, the only sound the distant rumble of thunder. The girls held their breath, staring into the mirror, waiting for something, anything to happen. At first, there was nothing, just their reflections and the flickering candlelight. But then the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the candle flickered wildly as if caught in an unseen breeze. Shadows in the mirror began to twist and warp, and the girls' reflections seemed to waver and blur. Sophie gasped, "Oh, did you see that?" Emily and Mia nodded, too frightened to speak. Suddenly, the mirror darkened, and a faint outline of a figure began to take shape. It was a woman, her hair long and matted, her eyes hollow and staring. Her face was pale, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, blood dripping from her lips. The girls screamed and stumbled backward, but their eyes were glued to the mirror. The figure moved closer, her eyes locking onto each of them, filled with a malevolent fury. She raised a hand, her fingers elongated and claw-like, scratching at the glass as if trying to break through. "Who's there?" A voice echoed, not from the figure in the mirror, but from behind them. It was Mrs. Williams, Emily's mother, awakened by the girls' screams. She flicked on the light, and the apparition vanished instantly, leaving only their terrified reflection staring back at them. The girls were shaking, their faces ashen. "What are you doing in here?" Mrs. Williams demanded, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. We tried to summon Bloody Mary," Mia admitted, her voice trembling. Mrs. Williams sighed, a mix of relief and exasperation washing over her face. "That's just a silly story. There's no such thing as Bloody Mary. Now get to bed, all of you." The girls nodded, too shaken to argue. They hurried back to Emily's room, but none of them could sleep. The image of Bloody Mary's twisted face and blood-streaked smile haunted their thoughts. Hours later, long after Mrs. Williams had returned to bed, the house was silent once more. Emily, Sophie, and Mia lay in their sleeping bags, trying to shake off the terror of what they had seen. Just as they were beginning to relax, they heard a faint scratching sound. It was coming from the bathroom. Emily sat up, her heart pounding. "Do you hear that?" Sophie and Mia nodded, their eyes wide with fear. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Slowly, they crept out of the bedroom and down the hall, drawn back to the bathroom despite their terror. The door was ajar, and the flickering candle had reignited on its own, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They peered inside, and there in the mirror was Bloody Mary. Her eyes burned with a sinister light, and her mouth moved as if speaking words they could not hear. Her clawed hand reached out, and this time the glass began to crack. Emily's scream pierced the silence, and the mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying. The candle went out, plunging the room into darkness. The girls ran back to Emily's room, slamming the door behind them. They huddled together, too terrified to move. They could hear whispers and faint laughter echoing in the hallway, as if Bloody Mary was still with them, lurking just out of sight. In the days that followed, the girls were haunted by nightmares and strange occurrences. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed in empty rooms, and every time they looked into a mirror, they felt her presence, just behind them, waiting. The legend of Bloody Mary was no longer just a story to them. They had summoned her, and now she would never let them go. It was a crisp autumn evening, and Sarah had just arrived at the Johnsons' house to babysit for the night. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were going out for dinner and a movie, leaving their two young children, Emily and Tommy, in Sarah's care. After a brief introduction and a few instructions, the Johnsons left, promising to be back by midnight. The house was cozy and quiet. Sarah put the children to bed at 8 p.m. as instructed and settled down in the living room with her homework. The silence was only interrupted by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. As the hours passed, Sarah began to feel a little uneasy. She brushed it off as her imagination playing tricks on her. Around 9 p.m., the phone rang. Sarah answered, expecting it to be the Johnsons checking in. "Hello," she said. There was silence on the other end, followed by heavy breathing. Then a voice, low and raspy, said, "Have you checked the children?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" she demanded, but the line went dead. She hung up, shaking her head. It was probably just a prank call, she thought. Trying to calm her nerves, she returned to her homework. Not 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Sarah hesitated, then picked it up. "Have you checked the children?" The same voice asked, now with a sinister edge. "Stop it." "Who is this?" Sarah shouted, but again, there was only the click of the phone hanging up. Panic began to set in. She looked towards the staircase leading to the children's bedrooms. They were sound asleep when she last checked, she reassured herself. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. The phone rang a third time. "Why haven't you checked the children?" the voice snarled. Sarah slammed the phone down and called the police. She explained the situation, her voice trembling. The dispatcher told her to stay calm and wait for a patrol car to arrive. They also advised her to check on the children, just in case. Summoning all her courage, Sarah crept upstairs. She peeked into Emily and Tommy's rooms. They were safe, tucked snugly in their beds. Relieved, she hurried back downstairs. The phone rang again. Sarah grabbed it, expecting the police. "It's coming from inside the house," the dispatcher said urgently. "Get out now." Sarah's blood ran cold. She dropped the phone and bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock in her panic. She heard heavy footsteps behind her. The realization that the caller was in the house sent her adrenaline into overdrive. She managed to unlock the door and sprinted outside just as police cars pulled up, their sirens piercing the night. The officers searched the house and found a man hiding in the upstairs closet, holding a knife. He had been watching Sarah and the children the entire evening, making his calls from the upstairs phone. The children were unharmed, still fast asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger. The man was arrested, and Sarah never babysat again. The Johnsons moved away shortly after the incident, but the story of the babysitter and the man upstairs continued to be told, a chilling reminder to always be vigilant, especially when you're home alone. In the dense, untamed forests of northern Minnesota, where the trees stood like silent sentinels and the winter winds whispered secrets of the past, there existed a legend that the locals spoke of only in hushed tones, the legend of the Wendigo. It was said to be a monstrous spirit that haunted the woods, preying on humans and turning them into cannibalistic creatures. Most dismissed it as mere folklore, a story to scare children and keep them from wandering too far. But for those who had encountered the Wendigo, it was all too real. John, an experienced wilderness guide, had heard the stories from his grandfather, who had been a hunter in these very woods. Though he had always respected the legend, he had never truly believed it. That changed one bitterly cold December. John had been hired to lead a group of researchers deep into the forest to study the effects of climate change on the local wildlife. The team consisted of Dr. Emily Harris, an environmental scientist, Mark, her assistant, and Lucas, a young intern eager to prove himself. They were well prepared for the harsh conditions, with supplies to last them a week and equipment for their studies. The first few days went smoothly. The group set up camp near a frozen lake, gathering data and marveling at the untouched beauty of the landscape. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, an uneasy feeling settled over the camp. It started with strange noises in the night, distant howls and the sound of branches snapping, as if something massive was moving through the trees. On the fourth night, the temperature plummeted, and a heavy snowstorm rolled in, blanketing the forest in a thick, suffocating silence. The team huddled around the campfire, the flickering flames their only source of warmth and light. John stared into the darkness beyond, his senses on high alert. "John, you look worried," Dr. Harris said, noticing his tense demeanor. "It's just the storm," John replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We should stay close to the fire and keep our eyes open." As the night wore on, the storm intensified, and visibility dropped to nearly zero. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, sending chills down their spines. It was Lucas. He had wandered off to collect more firewood and hadn't returned. "Stay here," John ordered. "I'll find him." With a flashlight in hand, John ventured into the swirling snow. The beam of light barely penetrated the darkness, but he pressed on, calling Lucas's name. He followed the tracks in the snow, which led deeper into the forest. After what felt like hours, he found Lucas, or what was left of him. The young intern's body was torn apart, his eyes wide with terror and his mouth frozen in a silent scream. John recoiled in horror, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. As he backed away, he saw something moving in the shadows, something tall and gaunt, with glowing eyes and a twisted, skeletal form. The Wendigo. John stumbled back to the camp, his mind reeling with shock. He burst into the clearing, shouting, "We have to leave. Now." Dr. Harris and Mark stared at him, their faces pale with fear. "What happened?" Dr. Harris demanded. "It's real," John panted. "The Wendigo. It killed Lucas. We need to get out of here before it finds us." The group hastily packed their gear, but the storm made it nearly impossible to move quickly. As they trudged through the snow, the wind howled around them, carrying with it the faint sound of eerie laughter. The Wendigo was hunting them. They hadn't gone far when Mark suddenly screamed and was dragged into the darkness, his cries for help fading into the howling wind. John and Dr. Harris ran, their hearts pounding with fear, but they knew they were being pursued. They reached a small cabin, abandoned and half buried in snow. Desperate for shelter, they broke down the door and stumbled inside, barricading it as best they could. The cabin was cold and dark, but it offered a brief respite from the relentless storm and the terror outside. "What are we going to do?" Dr. Harris whispered, her eyes wide with fear. John shook his head, trying to think. "We have to wait out the storm. At first light, we'll make a run for it." As the night dragged on, they heard the Wendigo's footsteps circling the cabin, its guttural growls filling the air. The creature scratched at the walls and windows, testing their defenses. John and Dr. Harris huddled together, clutching their makeshift weapons, knowing that it was only a matter of time before the Wendigo broke through. Just before dawn, the storm began to subside. The howling wind gave way to an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breathing. They knew they had to move quickly if they wanted to survive. John peeked out the window, seeing the first light of day creeping over the horizon. "Now," he whispered. "We go now." They burst out of the cabin, running through the snow as fast as they could. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees like skeletal hands reaching out to drag them back. They could hear the Wendigo behind them, its footsteps growing closer. Just as they reached the edge of the forest, the Wendigo let out a final, enraged roar. John turned, seeing the creature standing at the tree line, its eyes burning with a hatred that chilled him to the bone. But it did not follow them further. It stood there, watching as they escaped, its form slowly dissolving into the shadows of the forest. Exhausted and traumatized, John and Dr. Harris made it back to civilization, their ordeal finally over. They told their story to the authorities, but few believed them. The legend of the Wendigo was just that, a legend. But John knew better. He had seen the creature with his own eyes, felt its malevolent presence, and he knew that somewhere, deep in the forests of Minnesota, the Wendigo still hunted, waiting for its next victims to wander into its domain. The tale of the Wendigo became more than just a story for John and Dr. Harris. It became a haunting memory, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the wilderness, always watching, always waiting. In the heart of a bustling city, hidden among the neon signs and crowded streets of the red light district, there is a building that stood apart from the rest. Known only to a few, it was a place with a dark and sinister reputation. Locals whispered of a cursed room on the top floor, a room where shadows moved on their own, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. Lena, a journalist with a penchant for uncovering the truth behind urban legends, decided to investigate the rumors. She checked into the building, securing the cursed room for the night. The manager, an elderly man with a haunted look in his eyes, handed her the key without a word, his hand trembling slightly. The room was dimly lit, the wallpaper peeling and the furniture covered in a thick layer of dust. An oppressive silence filled the air, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. Lena set up her camera, determined to document any strange occurrences. She settled into an old armchair, the springs creaking under her weight, and waited. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Lena began to doubt the stories, thinking they were just the result of overactive imaginations. But then, just as she was about to pack up and leave, she noticed a shadow moving in the corner of the room. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew darker and more distinct as she watched. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The shadow seemed to be alive, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. She grabbed her camera, but the lens fogged up, rendering it useless. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Lena could see her breath misting in front of her. The shadow moved closer, taking on the vague shape of a person. Lena's heart raced as she tried to rationalize what she was seeing. It had to be a trick of the light, she told herself. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Suddenly, the shadow lunged at her. Lena screamed and scrambled out of the chair, but the shadow moved with her, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. She could feel a cold, malevolent presence pressing in on her, sapping her strength and filling her mind with dark thoughts. Desperate, Lena reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The shadow tightened its grip, and she could hear whispers in her ear, voices speaking in a language she couldn't understand. Her vision blurred, and she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness. Just as she was about to pass out, the door burst open. The manager stood there, his face pale and drawn. He muttered a few words in a language Lena didn't recognize, and the shadow recoiled, retreating back into the corner. The manager grabbed Lena's arm and pulled her out of the room, slamming the door behind them. "That room is cursed," he said, his voice trembling. "Many have gone in, but few have come out unscathed. You should never have come here." Lena nodded, too shaken to speak. She left the building and never looked back, but the memory of the shadow haunted her dreams. She tried to warn others, but few believed her, dismissing her story as just another urban legend. But the shadow remained, lurking in the cursed room, waiting for its next victim. And the red light district continued to draw in the curious and the unwary, unaware of the dark secret that lay hidden within its neon-lit streets. In a small village by the edge of a serene river in Mexico, the legend of La Llorona was well known but rarely spoken of. The villagers respected the tale, keeping their children close and avoiding the river at night. The story told of a beautiful woman named Maria who had married a wealthy man. They lived happily for a while and had 2 children. However, their happiness was short-lived, as her husband soon grew distant, eventually leaving her for another woman. In a fit of rage and despair, Maria took her children to the river and, in her madness, drowned them. Realizing the horror of her actions, she threw herself into the river and drowned as well. From that day on, her spirit roamed the riverbanks, wailing and searching for her lost children. Those who heard her cries were said to be cursed with misfortune. One humid summer night, a young boy named Diego found himself restless. The sweltering heat made sleep impossible, and the lure of the cool river was too tempting to resist. Ignoring his grandmother's stern warnings about La Llorona, he decided to sneak out for a swim. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow on the rippling water. As Diego approached the river, he felt a sudden chill run down his spine. The air grew colder, and the usual nocturnal sounds of the forest seemed to vanish, replaced by an oppressive silence. He brushed off his unease, attributing it to the tales his grandmother often told him. As he reached the riverbank, he heard it, a soft, mournful wail echoing through the night. "My children! Where are my children?" Diego froze. The voice was chilling, filled with a sorrow that seemed to pierce his very soul. His heart pounded in his chest, and he turned to run back to the safety of his home. But before he could move, he saw her, a figure in a tattered white dress, her long black hair cascading over her face. She was standing in the river, her eyes hollow and filled with a torment that defied description. "My children! Where are my children?" she wailed again, her voice rising in pitch and intensity. Diego's legs felt like lead. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. La Llorona began to move towards him, her ghostly figure gliding over the water. Her cries grew louder, more desperate. The river seemed to respond to her anguish, the water churning and frothing as if possessed by the same torment. In a moment of sheer terror, Diego managed to break free from his paralysis and ran as fast as he could. He stumbled and fell, the jagged rocks tearing at his skin, but he didn't stop. He could still hear her cries behind him, growing fainter but no less haunting. The village lights came into view, and he sprinted towards them, not daring to look back. Diego burst into his grandmother's house, his face pale and his body trembling. He tried to explain what he had seen, but his words came out in incoherent gasps. His grandmother understood without needing to hear the full story. She held him close, whispering prayers and lighting candles to ward off the evil spirit. From that night on, Diego was never the same. He avoided the river, and his once carefree demeanor was replaced by a haunted look in his eyes. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about how close he had come to La Llorona, how he had heard her sorrowful cries and lived to tell the tale. And so, the legend of La Llorona continued to be a solemn reminder to the villagers: never venture near the river at night, for the weeping woman still roamed, searching for her lost children and bringing misfortune to all who crossed her path. In the dark alleys of a city that never sleeps, where neon lights cast eerie glows and the hum of nightlife fills the air, there was a story that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened souls. It was the tale of a young prostitute named Maria, who worked the streets to survive. Maria was beautiful, with long raven black hair and eyes that held a glint of sadness. She was well known in the red light district, her striking looks and charming demeanor making her popular among the clients. Despite her outward bravado, she carried a deep fear, fueled by the stories whispered among her peers, tales of a client who never let his victims go. One cold winter night, Maria stood on the corner, shivering as she waited for her next client. A black car pulled up beside her, the window rolling down to reveal a man in a dark suit. His face was pale, his eyes cold and empty. He spoke in a low, monotone voice. "Are you available?" he asked. Maria nodded, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. She got into the car, the door closing with a heavy thud that echoed through the empty street. The man drove silently, taking her to an unfamiliar part of town, far from her usual haunts. They stopped in front of an old, dilapidated mansion, its windows dark and foreboding. "Come inside," the man said, his voice sending chills down her spine. Maria followed him, her instincts screaming at her to run. The inside of the mansion was cold and dusty, the air thick with the scent of decay. The man led her to a room at the end of a long hallway, its door creaking ominously as it opened. "Wait here," he instructed, before disappearing into the shadows. Maria stood in the center of the room, her heart pounding. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. She felt a presence, an unseen force that made her skin crawl. She tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic set in as she realized she was trapped. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the lights flickered. Maria turned to see the man standing in the doorway, his expression twisted into a grotesque smile. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his shadow stretched out before him, dark and menacing. "You're not the first," he said, his voice echoing around the room. "And you won't be the last." Maria backed away, but the shadow moved with her, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. She felt a cold, clammy hand on her shoulder and screamed as the man stepped closer, his face contorted with rage and hunger. "Your soul is mine," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. The room went dark, and Maria's screams were swallowed by the shadows. The portraits on the walls seemed to come alive, their painted eyes watching in silent horror. When the lights flickered back on, Maria was gone, leaving no trace behind. The man emerged from the mansion, his eyes returning to their empty, cold state. He got into his car and drove away, disappearing into the night. The old mansion remained silent, its walls holding the secrets of countless victims. Maria's disappearance became just another sad story in the red light district, a cautionary tale for those who walked the same dangerous path. The streets continued to buzz with life, but the shadows held a new terror, a reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked just out of sight. And the man in the dark suit continued his hunt, always searching for his next victim, leaving a trail of fear and darkness in his wake. Emma and Jake pulled into the rest stop just as the sun was setting. The parking lot was almost empty, with only a few old, rusty cars scattered around. They parked near the entrance and got out, enjoying the cool evening air. "I'll grab some snacks," Jake said, heading toward the vending machines. Emma nodded and walked over to a nearby bench to stretch her legs. As she looked around, she noticed something strange about the parked cars. They looked abandoned, covered in dust and cobwebs, but there was something eerie about them. She felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the nearest car, an old beat-up sedan. Peering through the dusty window, she saw a figure sitting in the driver's seat. At first, she thought it was a mannequin, but then she noticed the hollow eyes and gaunt face staring back at her. "Jake, come here," she called out, her voice trembling. Jake jogged over, carrying a bag of snacks. "What's wrong?" he asked, concerned. "Look inside," Emma said, pointing to the car. Jake bent down to look through the window, and his face went pale. "What the hell?" he muttered. The figure inside the car looked like it had been there for years, its skin shriveled and gray. Emma and Jake stepped back, unnerved. "We should get out of here," Emma said, her voice shaky. As they turned to leave, they heard a low moan coming from one of the other cars. They froze, listening intently. The moan grew louder, echoing through the empty parking lot. Jake grabbed Emma's hand, and they started to walk quickly toward their car. Suddenly, the headlights of the old cars flickered on, one by one. The moaning turned into whispers, filling the air with unintelligible words. The doors of the cars creaked open, and shadowy figures began to emerge, their hollow eyes fixed on Emma and Jake. Panic set in, and they sprinted to their car. As they fumbled with the keys, the figures moved closer, their whispers growing louder and more frantic. Finally, Jake managed to unlock the door, and they jumped in, slamming the doors shut. Jake turned the key in the ignition, but the car wouldn't start. The figures were now surrounding the car, their faces pressed against the windows, their whispers turning into desperate cries. Emma screamed as one of the figures reached for the door handle, trying to open it. With a desperate twist, Jake managed to start the car. He floored the gas pedal, and they sped out of the parking lot, leaving the figures behind. As they drove away, the headlights of the old cars flickered off, and the rest stop fell silent once more. Breathing heavily, Emma and Jake glanced at each other, the terror still fresh in their eyes. "What the hell were those things?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we're never stopping at a rest stop again." As they sped down the highway, the memory of the hollow-eyed figures lingered in their minds, a chilling reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the most unexpected places. In the outskirts of a quiet village, nestled deep within an ancient forest, stood Ravenwood Manor. The once grand estate had fallen into disrepair, its walls cracked and overgrown with ivy. The villagers avoided the manor, whispering tales of the White Lady, a ghostly figure who haunted its halls. The legend began centuries ago when Lady Evelyn, the beautiful young wife of Lord William Ravenwood, mysteriously vanished on their wedding night. The townsfolk searched the manor and its grounds, but she was never found. Lord William, driven mad with grief, took his own life, leaving the manor abandoned and cursed. Over the years, numerous sightings of Lady Evelyn's ghost were reported. She appeared as a sorrowful woman in a tattered white wedding gown, her face pale and her eyes filled with despair. Those who encountered her spoke of an overwhelming sense of sadness and terror, as if her anguish seeped into their very souls. One autumn evening, a paranormal investigator named Clara arrived in the village, drawn by the chilling stories of Ravenwood Manor. Clara was known for her bravery and skepticism, having debunked many supposed hauntings. She rented a room at the village inn and spent the evening interviewing the locals about their experiences. The next day, Clara made her way to the manor, her equipment in tow. The sky was overcast, and a cold wind rustled the leaves. She pushed open the heavy front door, its creak echoing through the empty halls. Dust motes danced in the dim light as she explored the decaying rooms, setting up cameras and motion sensors. As night fell, Clara settled into the old parlor, reviewing her notes by the light of a flickering lantern. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence descended upon the manor. Suddenly, a faint sobbing echoed through the corridors. Clara's heart raced, but she steadied herself, determined to uncover the truth. She followed the sound to the grand ballroom, where she saw her, a woman in a white gown, her back turned. Clara called out, but the figure didn't respond. Slowly, the woman turned, revealing a face twisted in anguish, eyes hollow and black. Clara felt a wave of dread wash over her, rooting her to the spot. The White Lady floated towards her, her movements graceful yet unsettling. "Why do you disturb my sorrow?" she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "I want to understand what happened to you," Clara replied, her voice trembling. The ghost's expression shifted to one of sorrow. "I was betrayed," she said. "On my wedding night, I discovered my husband's dark secret. He had made a pact with a demon to gain wealth and power. When I confronted him, he sacrificed me to seal the bargain." Clara's blood ran cold. "And now you're trapped here?" "Yes," the White Lady replied, "bound by the curse. But there's more. The demon still lurks in these halls, feeding on my despair." As she spoke, the temperature plummeted further, and an oppressive darkness enveloped the room. A guttural growl resonated through the manor, and a figure emerged from the shadows, a monstrous, twisted entity with glowing red eyes. Clara's instincts screamed at her to flee, but she stood her ground. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The White Lady's eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "Destroy the demon's vessel. It is hidden in the manor, binding its power. Without warning, the demon lunged at Clara. She dodged and ran, the entity close behind. Her mind raced as she tried to think of where the vessel might be hidden. Remembering the basement, she sprinted down the crumbling stairs, the demon's growls echoing in her ears. In the damp, dark basement, Clara spotted an old, ornate chest. She pried it open to reveal a grotesque idol, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. Summoning all her courage, she grabbed a rusted iron bar and smashed the idol. The demon let out a deafening roar, its form dissolving into shadows. As the last remnants of the demon vanished, the air grew warmer and the oppressive darkness lifted. Clara climbed back upstairs to find the White Lady standing in the grand ballroom, her expression peaceful. "Thank you," she said, her form beginning to fade. "You have freed me from my torment." With a final sorrowful smile, the White Lady disappeared, leaving Clara alone in the now silent manor. She gathered her equipment and left Ravenwood Manor, the weight of the encounter heavy on her mind. The villagers noticed the change immediately. The air seemed lighter, the oppressive aura around the manor gone. Clara shared her story, and while some remained skeptical, others felt a sense of relief. The legend of the White Lady of Ravenwood Manor lived on, but now it was a tale of redemption and the courage to face the darkest of evils. In a small village in Serbia, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, there was a legend that every local knew but rarely spoke of. It was the tale of the Serbian dance lady, a ghostly figure who appeared on moonlit nights, a presence heralded by haunting melodies and an eerie, otherworldly dance. Mila had grown up hearing the stories from her grandmother, who warned her to stay indoors on nights when the moon was full. But Mila, now 17 and full of curiosity, found it hard to believe in such old superstitions. One evening, as the full moon cast an ethereal glow over the village, Mila decided to see for herself if there was any truth to the legend. She slipped out of her house and made her way to the edge of the forest, where the dance lady was said to appear. The air was cool, and the leaves rustled softly in the breeze. Mila sat on a fallen log, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Hours passed, and just as she was about to give up and go home, she heard it, faint music drifting through the trees. The melody was hypnotic, drawing her deeper into the forest. As she walked, the music grew louder, more enchanting. Suddenly, she saw a woman in a flowing white dress, dancing gracefully in a small clearing. Her movements were fluid, almost inhuman, as if she were floating above the ground. Her long, dark hair cascaded around her, and her eyes were closed, lost in the rhythm of the dance. Mila watched in awe, captivated by the dance lady's beauty and grace. But as she watched, a sense of unease began to creep over her. The woman's dance became more frenzied, and her face twisted into a mask of sorrow and anger. Mila wanted to turn and run, but she found herself rooted to the spot, unable to look away. The dance lady's eyes snapped open, locking onto Mila's. They were dark and hollow, filled with an ancient, unending sadness. She moved towards Mila, her feet never touching the ground, and the music grew louder, more oppressive. Mila tried to scream, but no sound came out. The ghostly figure reached out, her cold fingers brushing against Mila's cheek. "Why have you come?" she whispered, her voice echoing through the forest like the wind. Mila could barely breathe. "I wanted to see if the stories were true," she managed to stammer. The dance lady's expression softened for a moment, and she seemed almost human. "The stories are true," she said. "I dance because I am bound to this place, a curse that can never be broken. Now you know the truth, and you must never speak of it." With that, she resumed her dance, fading into the moonlight as if she were a part of it. The music grew fainter, until it was nothing more than a distant memory. Mila found herself alone in the clearing, trembling and breathless. She hurried back to the village, vowing never to speak of what she had seen. The legend of the Serbian dance lady remained a silent whisper among the villagers, a reminder of the things that danced in the moonlight, unseen and unknown. And Mila, now a believer, never ventured into the forest on a full moon night again. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the secluded lovers' lane on the outskirts of town. Jenny and Mike had decided to escape the watchful eyes of their parents and friends for a night of privacy and romance. They parked Mike's old sedan in a quiet, wooded area, the trees forming a canopy above them. The radio played soft music as they talked and laughed, the world outside their car fading into the background. Jenny leaned against Mike, enjoying the warmth of his arm around her shoulders. It felt like they were the only two people in the world. Their moment of tranquility was shattered by a sudden news bulletin on the radio. The announcer's voice, urgent and grave, broke through the music. "We interrupt this program to bring you a special news alert. A dangerous convict has escaped from the state penitentiary. The man is known for his violent tendencies and has a distinctive feature, a hook for a hand. He was last seen in the vicinity of Lover's Lane. Residents are advised to stay indoors and lock their doors. If you see anything suspicious, contact the authorities immediately." Jenny's heart skipped a beat, and she sat up straight, glancing nervously at Mike. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mike nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, I heard. We should probably head back home." They both turned to look out the windows, peering into the darkness that surrounded them. The trees seemed to close in, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through them. Mike started the car, and the engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the night. As they drove away from the secluded spot, the sense of unease didn't leave them. Jenny kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure chasing after them. Mike focused on the road, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. They hadn't driven far when Jenny thought she heard something, an almost imperceptible scraping sound. She turned to Mike, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" Mike frowned, listening intently. The sound came again, a faint metallic scraping against the side of the car. He sped up, trying to put more distance between them and whatever was making the noise. "Maybe it's just a branch," Mike suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. They continued driving in tense silence until they reached the safety of Jenny's house. Mike pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. They both sat there for a moment, the weight of the night's events hanging heavily in the air. "Let's just get inside," Jenny said, her voice barely above a whisper. They got out of the car, and as they walked towards the front door, Jenny glanced back at the car one last time. Her blood ran cold. Hanging from the door handle on the passenger side was a rusty old hook. She screamed, grabbing Mike's arm and pointing. "Look!" Mike's face went pale as he saw the hook swinging gently in the night breeze. He rushed to the car, staring at the gruesome sight. The hook was covered in dried blood, and deep scratches marred the paint where it had scraped against the metal. The realization hit them both at once. The escaped convict had been right there, inches away from them, trying to get inside the car. If they hadn't left when they did, who knows what might have happened. They ran into the house, locking the doors behind them. Jenny's parents, alarmed by their panic, quickly called the police. Officers arrived within minutes, but despite a thorough search of the area, there was no sign of the hook man. The only evidence of his presence was the bloodied hook left behind on the car. The story of the hook man spread quickly through the town, becoming a cautionary tale for young couples seeking solitude in the dark, wooded lanes. Jenny and Mike never returned to Lover's Lane, the memory of that night a permanent scar on their minds. And though the hook man was never found, the fear he instilled lingered, a reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The old Victorian house at the end of Maple Street had always been a source of local legends and ghost stories. Its darkened windows and overgrown garden gave it an aura of mystery and fear. The townspeople avoided it, especially at night, convinced that something sinister lurked within its walls. They weren't wrong. Inside the house, hidden away in the labyrinth of dusty rooms and shadowy corridors, lived a man known only as the Night Stalker. His real name was long forgotten, buried under layers of horror and bloodshed. He had made the house his own, a sanctuary for his twisted desires and gruesome activities. The Night Stalker was a master of shadows, moving silently and unseen. He had been a part of the town for decades, his presence an invisible thread woven into the fabric of their lives. His victims were chosen carefully, always those who wouldn't be missed immediately: drifters, loners, and the occasional unlucky passerby. He lured them to the house with promises of shelter or a helping hand, only to reveal his true nature once they crossed the threshold. Tonight, a young woman named Sarah found herself at the gate of the old house. She had been driving home from a late-night shift when her car broke down. With no signal on her phone and the nearest gas station miles away, she spotted the house and decided to seek help. Desperation overrode the sense of unease that crept up her spine as she approached the front door. She knocked hesitantly, the sound echoing through the silent night. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a tall, gaunt man with piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. "My car broke down," Sarah explained. "I was hoping I could use your phone to call for help." The man nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Of course. Please come in." Sarah entered the dimly lit foyer, the air thick with dust and an unidentifiable odor that made her stomach churn. The man led her to a small sitting room, where an old rotary phone sat on a table. As she picked up the receiver, she noticed that it was dead. "I'm sorry," the man said, his voice closer now. "The phone lines have been down for ages, but you're welcome to wait here until morning. It's not safe to be out at night." Something in his tone sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she forced a smile. "Thank you. I appreciate it." The man left the room, and Sarah sat on a worn-out sofa, her mind racing. She had a feeling something was terribly wrong. As she looked around, she noticed the peculiar decor: old photographs of people who looked like they had been long dead, and odd trinkets that seemed out of place. Minutes passed, and the silence became unbearable. She decided to explore, hoping to find another way to contact help. She crept through the hallways, each step making the floorboards groan. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached a closed door at the end of a dark corridor. She hesitated before opening it, revealing a small room filled with various tools and instruments. Some were rusted, others gleamed menacingly in the dim light. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with strange, unidentifiable objects. A wave of nausea washed over her as she realized what she was seeing. Suddenly, she heard the man's voice behind her. "Curiosity killed the cat, you know?" Sarah spun around, her eyes wide with fear. The man stood in the doorway, his calm demeanor replaced by a sinister grin. "I'm afraid you won't be leaving," he said, stepping closer. "You see, you're the latest addition to my collection." Panic surged through Sarah, and she bolted past him, racing down hall. The house seemed to twist and turn, every corridor leading her deeper into its labyrinthine interior. The man's footsteps echoed behind her, growing louder with each passing second. She burst into a large room, slamming the door behind her. Her eyes scanned the room for an escape route. She spotted a window and rushed towards it, but before she could reach it, the door crashed open. The man entered, a glint of madness in his eyes. "There's no escape," he said softly, advancing towards her. "This house is my domain, and now so are you." Desperation gave Sarah strength. She grabbed a heavy lamp from a nearby table and swung it at the man. It connected with a sickening thud, and he staggered back dazed. She seized the moment and ran to the window, struggling to pry it open. As she fought with the stubborn latch, she felt his hand close around her ankle. She kicked out wildly, her foot connecting with his face. He howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to free herself. With one final effort, she shoved the window open and climbed through, dropping to the ground below. She didn't look back as she ran, her heart pounding in her ears. She sprinted through the overgrown garden and onto the road, not stopping until she reached the neighboring house. She banged on the door, screaming for help. The police arrived within minutes, but when they entered the old Victorian house, they found it empty. The Night Stalker had vanished, leaving behind only the remnants of his twisted activities. Sarah's account of her ordeal sent shockwaves through the town, and the legend of the Night Stalker grew. To this day, the old Victorian house stands at the end of Maple Street, abandoned and silent. The townspeople still avoid it, and on dark, quiet nights, they say you can hear whispers and footsteps echoing from within its walls. The Night Stalker may be gone, but the terror he instilled remains, a haunting reminder of the horrors that can hide behind the most ordinary of facades. Margaret had always loved dolls. As a child, she collected them with an enthusiasm that never waned, even as she grew into adulthood. Her collection filled an entire room in her quaint Victorian home, each doll meticulously cared for and displayed in glass cases. But Margaret's obsession took a dark turn when she found the life-size doll at an estate sale. The sale was held at the crumbling mansion of a reclusive old woman who had recently passed away. Among the dusty antiques and faded furniture, Margaret's eyes were drawn to a corner where the doll stood. It was exquisite, eerily lifelike, with porcelain skin, glassy blue eyes, and hair that felt almost human. Dressed in an old-fashioned lace dress, the doll exuded an aura of mystery and sadness. The estate sale organizer, a weary-looking man, seemed eager to part with it. "That doll has a strange history," he warned. The old woman was obsessed with it. She claimed it moved on its own. Margaret dismissed his words as mere superstition. She purchased the doll, feeling a thrill of excitement at adding such a unique piece to her collection. She carefully transported it home, setting it in the center of her doll room. That night, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She awoke to the sound of soft whispers, but when she turned on the light, the room was silent. Dismissing it as a trick of her imagination, she went back to sleep. In the following days, strange things began to happen. The doll would be in different positions than where she had left it. Its head would be turned, its arms moved, and once it was even found at the foot of her bed. Margaret tried to rationalize it. Perhaps she was moving it and forgetting, or maybe it was the house settling. But then the whispers grew louder. At night, she could hear them clearly, words she couldn't understand but felt deep in her bones. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to follow her every move, its lifeless lips almost curling into a sinister smile. One evening, determined to put an end to her unease, Margaret decided to record the doll overnight. She set up a camera and went to bed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. The next morning, she eagerly reviewed the footage. At first, there was nothing unusual. But then, in the dead of night, the doll's head slowly turned towards the camera. Its eyes seemed to gleam with a malevolent light, and its lips moved, whispering those same unintelligible words. Margaret's blood ran cold. She played the footage over and over, unable to believe what she was seeing. She decided she had to get rid of the doll. She wrapped it in a blanket and drove to a nearby river, intending to throw it in. But as she stood on the bridge, ready to release the doll into the water, it moved in her arms, its whispering voice louder than ever. Panicking, she hurled the doll into the river and watched as it sank beneath the surface. Relieved, she returned home, hoping the nightmare was over. That night, she slept soundly for the first time in weeks. But in the early hours of the morning, she was awakened by a familiar whisper. Her heart pounded as she turned on the light. There, standing at the foot of her bed, was the doll, drenched and mud-streaked, its eyes fixed on her with a malevolent gleam. Margaret screamed and fled from the house, never to return. The locals found her wandering the streets, babbling incoherently about the doll. She was taken to a hospital, where she remained, haunted by the whispers and the lifeless eyes that followed her every move. Her home was left abandoned, and the doll room fell into disrepair. But on quiet nights, passers-by swore they could hear whispers coming from the house, and those brave enough to look through the windows claimed to see a life-size doll standing in the center of the room, its eyes gleaming with a sinister light. The doll collector's tale became a legend, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most innocent of facades.